She built her cabin against the old water tower. Amos Reddick, who had worked the railroad for 31 years and buried 2 of his own children to the cold, told her plainly, "If you put your winter wall against that rot, your boy will freeze with you before February." She had $34, a 6-year-old son, and no way to frame 4 walls before the freeze. On January 12, 1888, the temperature dropped 70 degrees in 8 hours. But 5 months earlier, Clara Halverson Moen had never built the outside of a house in her life. She had arrived in Yankton County in August of 1887, with her boy asleep against her shoulder and her husband's death still raw in her throat. The fever had taken him in 11 days. 11 days from the first shiver to the last breath, and then the foreman had handed her $14 in back wages and told her the company could not transport dependents east. Clara Halverson Moen stood on the platform at Redfield with a trunk, a 6-year-old, and the paper her husband had filed 4 months before his lungs filled with fluid. The claim was 7 miles northwest. 160 acres of grass and wind and nothing else. No cabin, no well, no neighbors within shouting distance. Just a survey stake and a promise that if she improved the land and lived on it for 5 years, it would become hers. She had $20 more sewn into her corset. $34 total to build a life. The freighter who hauled her trunk to the claim site charged her $2 for the 7 miles. He did not help her unload. He looked at the survey stake, looked at the empty grass, looked at the boy clutching her skirt, and said nothing. What was there to say? She was a widow with a child on a treeless quarter section in late summer, and winter came early to Dakota. The first night, she and Elias slept in the grass with the trunk as a windbreak. The stars were so thick overhead that the boy asked if God had spilled something. Clara held him close and did not answer. She was counting months. August now, hard freeze by November, sometimes earlier. 3 months to build shelter, find water, gather fuel. 3 months with no help, no team, no experience framing walls. Her husband had been the builder. Lars knew joinery, knew how to read a timber's grain and set a corner square. Clara knew how to cook, how to mend, how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. She knew the inside of a house. She had never built the outside of one. In the morning, she walked the claim. The grass was waist-high in places, bent by wind into waves that moved like water. No trees, no creek, no rock outcropping for foundation stone. Just the grass and the sky, and 1/2 mile to the east, something that did not belong. A railroad water tower stood alone on the prairie, its tank silhouetted against the morning sun like a black crown on wooden legs. The rail line had shifted south 2 years earlier, the freighter had mentioned. The siding was abandoned. The water stop was dead. Clara walked toward it without knowing why. Elias followed, still half asleep, his small hand wrapped around 2 of her fingers. The tower was larger than she had expected. The tank sat 30 feet above the ground on massive timber posts, each one thicker than a man's torso. The posts were anchored in stone piers that someone had hauled from God knew where. The tank itself was a cylinder of vertical staves bound by iron hoops, like a barrel turned on its end and scaled up to hold thousands of gallons. Beneath the tank, in the shadow of its bulk, the wind dropped. Clara stood there and felt the stillness. The posts blocked the worst of the westerly gusts. The tank overhead cut the sky into manageable pieces. She looked up at the underside of the tank. Water stains ran down the staves. A slow drip fell from one seam, striking the dust and vanishing. The tower still held water. 3 days later, Amos Reddick rode out to see what the widow was doing. Reddick was 58 years old. He had worked the railroad for 31 years, first as a section hand, then as a foreman running crews across Nebraska and into Dakota. He had watched men freeze in blizzards and roast in summer sun. He had buried 2 of his own children to the cold, years apart. In graves he dug himself because the ground was too hard for anyone else to bother. He knew what winter could do to people who were not ready. The widow had been asking questions in town. She had bought nails and oakum and a length of pipe. She had asked the blacksmith about fitting flanges. She had asked the freighter where she might find scrap lumber cheap. Word traveled fast in a place with so few people. Reddick found her at the abandoned tower, measuring the distance between two of the posts with a length of rope. "You cannot be serious," he said. Clara did not stop measuring. "About what?" "Building against this thing." Reddick dismounted and walked the perimeter of the tower base, studying the timbers with the eye of a man who had inspected 1,000 of them. "I helped raise this tower in '79. It was overbuilt then. It has had 8 years to rot since." "Has it rotted?" "Wood rots. That is what wood does." "Has this wood rotted?" Clara tied a knot in her rope to mark the measurement and moved to the next gap. Reddick pulled a knife from his belt and jabbed it into the nearest post. The blade sank a 1/4 inch and stopped. He tried another post. Same result. He frowned. "The posts are sound," he admitted. "But the tank still holds water. I checked. Water it has been holding for 2 years without maintenance, without anyone tightening hoops or packing seams. One hard freeze and it will split like a melon." Clara finally looked at him. "What would you have me do instead?" "Build a proper cabin, 4 walls and a roof. Get yourself a well dug before the ground freezes. Cut timber for fuel." He stopped. He looked at the treeless horizon. He looked at the widow's thin frame and the small boy sitting in the grass nearby, drawing pictures in the dirt with a stick. "Where would I get timber?" Clara asked. "There are no trees within 15 miles. The freighter wants $4 a load for scrap from Redfield. I have $32 left. How many loads of scrap can I buy and still have money for a stove? For food? For seed in spring?" "You cannot build a cabin from nothing." "I am not building from nothing." Clara pointed at the tower. "That is 60 feet of windbreak on the west side. That is a tank that still holds water. That is timber posts set in stone that I could never afford to lay myself. It is not nothing." Reddick shook his head slowly. He had seen this before. The desperate arithmetic of people who had run out of choices and started making decisions with faith instead of sense. "That tank will freeze," he said. "The wood will split. And when the January winds come through, you will have built your walls against a structure that funnels the cold instead of blocking it. You will have a chimney instead of a shelter." He looked at Elias, still drawing in the dirt, oblivious. "If you put your winter wall against that rot, your boy will freeze with you before February." Clara's jaw tightened. She did not argue. She did not have the energy to argue, and arguing would not change the math. $32. 1 mule she had bought for $11 from a farmer who needed cash more than horseflesh. 1 milk cow that had come with the claim, left behind by whoever had failed here before. Enough rough lumber to frame maybe 2 walls purchased from the wreckage of an abandoned sod house 3 miles south. No well, no fuel supply, no husband, and 3 months until the killing cold. "I appreciate your concern," Clara said. "I do not share your confidence that I have better options." Reddick mounted his horse. He looked down at her for a long moment, and his face held something that might have been pity or might have been respect. She could not tell. "I have seen a lot of people die on this prairie," he said. "Most of them were doing something that made sense at the time." He rode east toward town. Clara watched him go. Then she turned back to the tower and kept measuring. The inherited knowledge came to her that night while Elias slept, and she lay awake counting the sounds of the wind. Her father had been a cooper. Halvor Halvorsen, born in a village outside Bergen, trained in the trade of making barrels and casks before he came to America and found that the skills translated poorly to a country that manufactured everything in factories. He had worked as a farmhand instead, but he had never stopped seeing the world through a cooper's eyes. Clara remembered being 7 years old watching him repair a water barrel behind their rented house in Minnesota. The barrel had been leaking, and her mother wanted to throw it away, but Halvor had said no. He had soaked the barrel overnight, then shown Clara how the staves swelled tight against the hoops. "Wet wood wants to be whole," he had said, running his hand along the seam that no longer leaked. "Dry wood pulls apart, wet wood pushes together." He had taught her to knock on wood and listen to the sound. Solid wood rang, rotted wood thudded. He had taught her that a good barrel failed slowly and visibly. You could see the seams opening, hear the tone change before it failed all at once. "You always have warning," he had said, "if you know how to listen." Clara sat up in the darkness. The tower was a quarter-mile away, invisible in the moonless night, but she could feel its presence like a weight on the horizon. The tank was a barrel, an enormous barrel turned vertical and mounted on legs, but a barrel nonetheless. The same principles applied, the same physics, the same warnings. If the staves were still swollen tight against the hoops, the tank was sound. If the tone rang true, the wood had not rotted. And if she could keep water in the tank, if she could feed it rain and snowmelt, and keep the staves wet through the winter, the wood would hold. Water up high was not just water, it was pressure. Head pressure, her father had called it, the weight of water pushing down from height, forcing itself through pipes and into barrels below. The railroad had built the tower specifically because height meant force. Water from the tower flowed without pumps, fed by nothing but gravity. If she built her cabin against the tower, if she made the tower's west side into her fourth wall, she would have windbreak. The massive posts would catch the worst of the prairie gusts. The tank's bulk would cut the sky. If she captured runoff from the cabin's roof and channeled it into the tank, she would have a reservoir that refilled itself with every rain and every thaw. She would not need a well. She would not need to haul water across the frozen prairie in January. If she ran a pipe from the tank to a barrel inside the cabin, gravity would deliver water to her door. And if she ran that pipe near the stove first, if she let the heat from her fire warm the water before it reached the barrel, she would have water that did not freeze and a system that insulated itself. The idea assembled itself in her mind like the pieces of a barrel clicking into hoops. She could see the shape of it. She could feel the logic. It might work. It might also kill them both. Marta Iverson arrived 2 days later with a jar of preserves and a face full of doubt. Marta was 34, a widow herself, holding a claim 3 miles northeast with her 2 teenage sons. She had survived 4 Dakota winters. She knew what it took. "They're saying you mean to build into the old water tower," she said, setting the preserves on Clara's trunk. They were standing in the grass near the tower, because the grass was the only place Clara had to receive visitors. "They are saying correctly." Marta walked around the tower's base, looking up at the tank overhead. Her expression was careful, the expression of someone trying to find polite words for an impolite thought. "Water up high is useful in summer," she said finally. "In January it becomes a hanging block of ice. Not if it keeps moving." "Moving how?" Clara explained. "The runoff capture, the gravity feed, the pipe routed near the stove, the warming loop, the interior reservoir that would buffer against freeze." Marta listened without interrupting. When Clara finished, Marta was quiet for a long moment. "You have thought about this," she said. "I have nothing else to think about. And if it freezes anyway, if the pipe bursts or the tank splits, then I will be no worse off than I am now. No well, no fuel, no shelter. At least this way I have a chance." Marta looked at her, really looked at her, the way women looked at each other when they were measuring something that could not be measured. "Your father was a barrel maker," Marta said. It was not a question. Clara had mentioned it in town, asking about oakum. "Yes." "And you think a water tank is just a big barrel?" "I think my father taught me to listen to wood. I think this wood still sounds right. I think water wants height and wood wants to be wet, and I do not have the money to build 4 walls and dig a well and haul enough fuel for winter. Clara's voice did not waver. I think this is the only chance I have. Marta nodded slowly. She did not say Clara was right. She did not say Clara was wrong. She picked up the preserves from the trunk and pressed them back into Clara's hands. You will need these more than we will, she said. My boys shot an elk last week. We have meat. She walked back toward her wagon without looking at the tower again. Clara stood holding the jar of preserves, blackberry. She could see through the glass and felt something loosen in her chest. It was not approval. It was not help. But it was not mockery, and in that moment, that was enough. The lumber came on the 4th day, hauled by a freighter who overcharged and underdelivered. Clara had paid $8 for what was supposed to be enough scrap to frame 3 walls. What arrived was enough for 2, maybe 2.5 if she stretched it. She did not argue. There was no point. The freighter had her money. The lumber was on the ground. The sun was already past noon, and every hour of daylight was a gift she could not waste. Elias helped her sort the boards by length. He was 6 years old, too young for real labor, but he could carry the shorter pieces and stack them in piles. He worked without complaint, his small face serious, imitating the way Clara moved and spoke. Mama, he said, dragging a board toward the pile, why are we building against the tower? Because the tower is strong. Papa said towers fall down. Clara stopped. Lars had said that once, about a grain silo in Minnesota that had collapsed in a storm. She had not realized Elias remembered. Some towers fall down, she said. This one will not. How do you know? I listened to it. Elias considered this. Can I listen? Clara took his hand and led him to the nearest post. She pulled the knife from her belt, Lars's knife, the one she had kept, and struck the post with the flat of the blade. The timber rang, a solid sound that seemed to travel up through the wood and into the tank above. Hear that? She said. Elias nodded. That is the sound of wood that wants to stay standing. If it were sick, it would sound different. Hollow, tired. She struck the post again. This wood is not tired. Elias reached out and put his hand on the post. He knocked with his small knuckles, listening. The sound was thin compared to the knife, but it was there. I think it wants to stay standing, he said. Then we will help it. She did not tell him about the risks. She did not tell him that Amos Reddick thought they would freeze. She did not tell him that everything she was doing was a gamble she could not afford to lose. He was 6 years old. He needed to believe his mother knew what she was doing, and maybe, if she acted like she knew what she was doing, she would start to believe it herself. Silas Brundage came on the 6th day. Brundage owned the general store in Redfield, which meant he owned the only source of supplies within 20 miles. He also held notes on half the claims in the county, small loans at large interest, offered to settlers who had run short of cash and had no other options. When claims failed, Brundage often ended up with the improvements. A stove here, a plow there, sometimes an entire cabin that he could sell to the next desperate arrival. He was 51 years old, thin in a way that suggested hunger remembered rather than felt, with eyes that calculated value in everything they saw. He found Clara cutting notches into a board, her sleeves rolled up and her forearms flecked with sawdust. Mrs. Moen, he said, not dismounting, I understand you have undertaken an unusual project. Clara kept cutting. News travels. It does, particularly when the news concerns a widow attempting to winter under a railroad ruin. Brundage smiled. It did not reach his eyes. I thought I would offer assistance. What kind of assistance? Credit. I can extend you a note for lumber, hardware, a proper stove. Enough to build a real cabin away from this. He gestured at the tower. Monument to optimism. In what terms? 20% interest, payable in spring. If you cannot pay, we arrange an alternative settlement. Clara looked up from her cutting. What kind of alternative? Your team, your improvements, whatever has value. So if I cannot pay, you take everything I have built. If you cannot pay, you will have nothing to build with anyway. I'm offering you a chance to survive the winter properly. What you are doing now. He shook his head. Even the children are laughing about it in town. They call it the widow's contraption. Clara set down her saw. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight. The children, she said. The adults, too, if we are being honest. Amos Reddick has told everyone who will listen that you are building yourself a death trap. He says you will be frozen solid by February. Amos Reddick does not know what I know. And what do you know? Brundage leaned forward in his saddle. You are a widow with a child, a claim you cannot work, and $30 that will not last until Christmas. You have no experience building anything. You have no help. And you are gambling your son's life on the hope that an abandoned water tank will somehow keep you alive through a Dakota winter. He paused. I am offering you a way out. Clara wanted to accept. Some part of her, the part that woke at 3 a.m. and counted every dollar, every day, every meal she might not be able to provide, wanted to take the money and build something conventional, something safe, something that would not make her the joke of the county. But she knew Brundage's terms. 20% in 6 months meant she would owe more than she could earn, and when she could not pay, he would take the mule, the cow, the stove she could not afford to buy in the first place. He would take everything, and she would be exactly where she was now, except it would be spring, and she would have wasted an entire winter. No, she said. Brundage's smile faded. No, I do not want your credit. I do not want your terms. I have a plan, and I will see it through. You have a plan. He said the word like it was obscene. You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to freeze to death playing house against a rotten tower, and when you do, your boy will freeze with you. And then I will buy your improvements at auction for a quarter of what they cost you, and someone sensible will use them to build something real. He gathered his reins. I am trying to help you, Mrs. Moen. But if you insist on killing yourself and your child through stubbornness, I will not stand in your way. He rode back toward town without waiting for a response. Clara watched him go. Her hands were shaking now. She pressed them against her thighs until they stopped. Elias was behind her, near the lumber pile. He had heard everything. She could see it in his face, the fear he was trying to hide, the questions he did not know how to ask. Mama, he said, are we going to freeze? Clara walked to him and knelt until their eyes were level. No, she said. We're not going to freeze. That man does not know what we know. He has never built a barrel. He has never listened to wood. He sees a widow and a child, and he thinks he sees weakness. She took his face in her hands. But we are not weak, Elias. We are just quiet, and quiet is not the same as weak. Elias nodded. He did not look convinced, but he nodded. Clara stood up and went back to her saw. The notch was not going to cut itself. By the end of the second week, she had the sill line laid. It was rough work, rougher than it should have been, but the board sat level on the stones she had hauled from a dry creek bed 2 miles south. Elias had helped with the stones, carrying the smaller ones in a sack, while Clara loaded the larger ones onto the mule and walked them back to the site. The sill defined the shape of the cabin. 3 walls only, 12 feet on the north side, 16 feet on the south, and 14 feet on the east. The west side was the tower. Clara had measured the gap between the tower posts a dozen times. The spacing was not even. Railroad engineers had cared about load distribution, not aesthetic symmetry, but she could work around it. She would frame her wall a foot short of the posts on either end, leaving a narrow service gap for drainage and inspection. The gap would also give her room to run the pipe down from the tank without it passing through the living space. The first wall went up on the 14th day. She had no help. Marta Iverson had her own work. Her boys were cutting hay on a neighbor's claim for wages. Amos Reddick had not returned. No one else had offered. So Clara built the way women had always built when there was no one else to do it, slowly, carefully, accepting that every task would take twice as long as it should. She cut the studs from her longest boards, measuring twice, 3 times before each cut. She notched them for the cross braces, the way she had seen Lars do it, the way she half remembered from watching her father work. She made mistakes. She cut one stud 2 inches short and had to splice it with a scrap piece, lashing the joint with wire until she could find proper nails. The first stud went into the sill at mid-morning, the second at noon. By sunset, she had 4 studs standing, braced with temporary boards that angled into the dirt like the legs of an exhausted animal. Her arms ached. Her back screamed. Her hands were blistered where the saw handle had rubbed raw. But 4 studs were standing. Elias brought her water from the bucket she had filled at Marta's well that morning. The bucket was nearly empty. Tomorrow she would have to make the 3-mile trip again, or start collecting rain. She looked up at the tower, at the tank silhouetted against the darkening sky. Water was up there. Thousands of gallons, maybe, waiting. But she could not reach it yet. The pipe was still on order from Brundage's store, ordered before his offer, paid for in advance, but delayed now in ways she suspected were not accidental. Without the pipe, the tank was useless, just a promise of water she could see but not touch. Another week, she told herself, 2 at most. The pipe would come. She would make it work, and if it did not, she would haul water from Marta's well. She would melt snow. She would do whatever she had to do. That was all there was to it. The first hard setback came on the 17th day. She was raising the header beam for the east wall, the longest single piece of lumber she had, and the hardest to manage alone when the brace slipped. The beam came down, not fast, not violently, but fast enough and violent enough. It struck her shoulder on the way down, spun her sideways, and landed in the dirt with a sound like a door slamming. Clara lay on the ground, gasping. Her shoulder felt like it was on fire. Elias was screaming somewhere, his voice thin and high. She forced herself to sit up. Her shoulder moved. It was not broken. She could feel the bruise forming, deep and hot, but the joint was intact. "I am all right," she said, though her voice came out as a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Elias, I am all right." He ran to her and threw his arms around her neck, crying. She held him with her good arm and waited for the pain to settle into something manageable. The beam lay in the dirt, undamaged, ready to be raised again, but not today. Not with one arm already swelling. Clara looked at the sky. September was ending. The grass was yellowing. The nights were cold enough now that she slept with Elias pressed against her for warmth. 8 weeks until the first hard freeze. Maybe less, and she had lost a day. That night, lying awake with her shoulder throbbing, she heard hoofbeats. It was too dark to see anything. She reached for Lars's knife and held it against her chest, listening. Elias stirred beside her, but did not wake. The hoofbeats stopped near the tower. She heard someone dismount, footsteps in the grass. "Mrs. Moen?" A voice she did not recognize. Male, older, with an accent that sounded like home. Clara did not answer. Her grip on the knife tightened. "Mrs. Moen, I am not here to hurt you. My name is Nels Brecka. I worked the pumps at the Redfield station before it closed. Marta Iverson said you might need help. Clara sat up slowly, trying not to disturb Elias. What kind of help? The kind that knows something about water tanks. She heard him move closer, heard him stop a respectful distance away. May I look at the tower in the morning? He asked. I want to see if what you're building makes any sense. Clara thought about Amos Reddick's prediction, thought about Brundage's smile, thought about the beam that had almost crushed her. Yes, she said. In the morning. Nels Tolif Breka was 63 years old, with hands that looked like they had been carved from the same wood he had spent his life working. He arrived at first light, leading a mule loaded with tools Clara did not recognize. He did not introduce himself again. He walked straight to the nearest tower post, pulled a mallet from his belt, and struck the timber. The sound rang out across the prairie, a clear, solid note that seemed to hang in the air. Nels struck the post again, listened, moved to the next post, and repeated the process. He worked his way around the entire base of the tower, striking each timber, tilting his head like a man tuning an instrument. Clara watched from the half-framed cabin, her shoulder bound with strips torn from a petticoat. Elias stood beside her, still sleepy, watching the stranger with open curiosity. Your boy, Nels said without turning around. He is how old? 6. Old enough to learn. Nels beckoned with one hand. Come here, boy. I will show you something. Elias looked at Clara. She nodded. He walked to Nels, who crouched down until they were eye to eye. The old man held out the mallet. Hit the post, he said. Not hard, just enough to make it speak. Elias took the mallet in both hands. It was too heavy for him, but he managed to swing it against the timber. The sound was softer than when Nels had struck, but it was there. What did you hear? Nels asked. A sound. What kind of sound? Elias thought about it. Like a bell, but deeper. Nels nodded. That is the sound of wood that is still alive. Wood that has water in its grain, wood that is not dried out and cracked. Dead wood sounds different. He took the mallet back and struck a piece of scrap lumber lying nearby. The sound was flat, dull. Hear the difference? The post sounds better. The post sounds alive. Nels stood up, his knees cracking. Your mother is not crazy, boy. She's listening to something most people have forgotten how to hear. He walked to Clara, who had not moved from her position near the framing. The posts are sound, he said. Better than I expected. Railroad overbuilt this tower. They always did back then. Afraid of what would happen if a water stop failed in the middle of winter. He looked up at the tank. The tank is another question. I need to get up there. There is a ladder on the south side. The rungs are rotten. I saw. Nels unslung a coil of rope from his mule. I will go up the posts. I have done it before. Clara watched him climb. He moved slowly but without hesitation, wedging his boots against the cross bracing and pulling himself up with a strength that seemed impossible for his age. In 10 minutes he was on the platform that circled the base of the tank. She could not see what he was doing up there. She heard him moving, heard the mallet striking wood, heard him muttering to himself in Norwegian. 20 minutes later, he climbed back down. Well? Clara asked. Nels wiped his hands on his trousers. His face was unreadable. The tank has 3 bad seams, he said. One is weeping now. You have seen the drip. The other 2 will open when the first hard freeze comes. The hoops are loose on the north side. If you do nothing, the tank will fail by January. Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Then it cannot be fixed. I did not say that. Nels walked to his mule and began unloading tools. I said if you do nothing, But you're not going to do nothing. You're going to learn how to pack a seam and tighten a hoop, and we are going to make that tank hold water through a winter it was never meant to survive." "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it. Nels paused, a hand tool halfway out of the saddlebag. "Why what?" "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Nels was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, further away. "I had a daughter," he said. "She married a man who took her to a claim in Nebraska. Bad land, bad water, bad luck. She wrote me letters asking for help, and I was too proud to send it. I thought she needed to learn. I thought hardship built character." He pulled the tool free and examined it. "She died in the winter of '82, her and both her children, froze in a dugout because the stovepipe cracked and she did not know how to fix it." Clara did not know what to say. The silence stretched between them. "I cannot bring her back," Nels said, "but I can make sure someone else's daughter does not die for the same reason." He looked at Clara, and his eyes were hard. "You are not charity, Mrs. Moen. I have watched you work for 2 weeks. I have seen you carry stones that would break most men. You have something in you that my daughter did not have, or maybe she had it and no one taught her how to use it. Either way, I'm going to teach you what I know, and then I am going to leave you alone to use it. That is the arrangement. Yes or no?" Clara thought about Amos Reddick's warning, about Brundage's sneer, about the beam that had nearly crushed her because she had no one to help her raise it. "Yes," she said. The first lesson was seam packing. Nels climbed back up to the tank with a bucket of oakum and a caulking iron. Clara followed, her shoulders screaming with every pull, her teeth gritted against the pain. The platform was narrow, barely 2 feet wide, and the wind was stronger up here. She could see for miles in every direction. The prairie stretched to the horizon, brown and gold and endless. Her half-built cabin looked like a child's toy from this height. "Here." Nels pointed to a seam between 2 staves. Clara could see the gap, a dark line where the wood had shrunk away from its neighbor. "Feel it." She ran her fingers along the seam. The gap was wider than she had expected. She could fit her fingernail into it. "Water finds every weakness," Nels said. "Your job is to find them first." He handed her a wad of oakum, loose fiber that smelled of tar. "Pack it into the seam, not too tight, not too loose. The fiber needs room to swell when it gets wet." Clara pushed the oakum into the gap, working it in with her fingers. "Deeper," Nels said. "All the way to the back. If you leave air pockets, the water will find them." She pushed harder. The oakum compressed against the back of the seam. "Now the iron." Nels handed her the caulking tool. "Drive it in. Make the fiber lock against the wood." She struck the iron with the mallet. The oakum compressed further. She struck again, until Nels held up a hand. "Good. Now the next seam, and the next. We have 14 to do before dark." By sunset, Clara's hands were black with tar, and her shoulder had gone from pain to numbness. She had packed 9 seams. Nels had done the other 5, working twice as fast as she could manage. "Tomorrow we do the hoops," he said, climbing down. "Tonight you rest." Clara looked at her hands, at the tower, at the tank that might now hold water through the winter. "Thank you," she said. Nels did not answer. He was already walking toward his mule. The pipe arrived on the 23rd day. Brundage's man delivered it without comment, dumping the lengths of iron on the ground and driving away before Clara could inspect the shipment. 2 sections were dented. One was rusted through at one end. She had paid for 6 lengths. She had received 5. Clara stood looking at the pile and felt the familiar weight settle on her shoulders. She could go back to town, demand the missing piece, argue, and threaten. It would take a day, maybe two, if Brundage decided to make difficulties, or she could make do with what she had. She chose to make do. Nels helped her plan the pipe run. The route was simple in principle, down from the tank's drain valve, along the service gap between the tower and the cabin wall, then through a hole in the wall to an interior barrel. But the principle did not account for the freeze. Any pipe exposed to open air will freeze, Nels said, tracing the route with his finger. You need to keep it close to heat. The stove will be here. Clara pointed to the spot she had marked in the dirt. The pipe can run past it on the way to the barrel. Past is not enough. You need the pipe to touch the warmth, to carry it. Nels thought for a moment. We build a box, a wooden box around the pipe, insulated with straw. The box runs along the wall past the stove, down to the barrel. The heat from the stove warms the air in the box. The air warms the pipe. The pipe warms the water. Will that be enough? In a mild winter, yes. In a hard winter, Nels shrugged. We build a coil, a loop of pipe that sits in the firebox. Water passes through the coil before it goes to the barrel. The fire heats the water directly. Clara did not ask where she would get the extra pipe for a coil. She did not ask how she would afford a stove with a firebox large enough to hold it. She just nodded and added the problems to the list of problems she was already carrying. One thing at a time. That was all she could do. By the end of September, the walls were framed. 3 walls standing, rough, uneven, built by a woman who had learned joinery from watching and guessing, but standing. Clara walked the perimeter of the cabin every morning, checking the joints, looking for weaknesses. She found plenty. A corner that was not quite square, a stud that was starting to bow under load, a sill board that had cracked and needed splinting. She fixed what she could. She noted what she could not. She kept building. The roof was the next challenge. She had no lumber long enough for rafters. She had no tar paper for waterproofing. She had no nails left. Nels solved the first 2 problems by scavenging. He rode 20 miles south to an abandoned claim and came back with a wagon full of salvaged boards, rafters from a collapsed barn, tar paper from a shed that had lost its walls. He charged her nothing for the trip, though she knew he had spent 2 days on it. You can pay me back in spring, he said when she protested, if you're still alive. The nails were harder. Clara had $3 left. Nails cost 12 cents a pound in Redfield. She needed at least 10 pounds, more if she made mistakes. She went to Brundage's store. He was behind the counter when she walked in, sorting receipts. He did not look up. Mrs. Moen, come to accept my offer? I need nails, 10 pounds. That will be $1.20. He still did not look up. Cash. Clara counted the coins onto the counter. She was left with $1.80. Brundage swept the coins into his cash drawer and finally raised his eyes. You know, the tower house is the talk of the county. People come into the store just to ask about the widow who is building herself into a ruin. Then you should thank me for the business. I should thank you for the entertainment. He reached under the counter and produced a paper sack. 10 pounds, counted them myself. Clara took the sack and left without another word. She did not count the nails until she got back to the claim. When she did, she found 8 pounds, just over 100 nails short of what she needed. She thought about going back, demanding the rest, making a scene. Instead, she sat down on the sillboard and looked at the sky. The clouds were thickening to the west. The air smelled like rain. She had 8 pounds of nails. She would make them work. Amos Reddick returned on the 12th of October. The roof was half finished. tar paper laid over the rafters, weighted with stones until she could nail it down. The pipe run was complete, though the interior section was still exposed, waiting for the insulation box Nels was building. The tank overhead had been sealed, and the hoops tightened. A slow but steady drip of water fell from the drain valve into a test bucket below. Reddick rode around the site slowly, examining everything. His face gave nothing away. "You have been busy," he said. "I have been working." "So I see." He dismounted and walked to the cabin wall that abutted the tower. He ran his hand along the boards, feeling for gaps. "Who helped you with the seams up top?" "Nels Brecka." "I know Nels. Worked the pumps at Redfield for 15 years. Good man." Reddick squinted up at the tank. "He thinks this will work?" "He thinks it has a chance." "A chance?" Reddick sighed. "Mrs. Moen, a chance is what you give a horse with a broken leg. A chance is what you pray for when the doctor shakes his head." He turned to face her. "I came here a month ago and told you this would fail. I still believe it will. But," he paused, as if the next words cost him something. "You have done more than I expected. The framing is rough, but it is standing. The pipe run makes sense, and Nels does not waste his time on fools." Clara waited. "I am not saying you will survive the winter," Reddick said. "I am saying I was wrong to say you could not try." It was not an apology. It was not even close to an apology. But Clara understood what it cost a man like Reddick to say even that much. "Thank you," she said. Reddick mounted his horse. "I will check on you in November, if you are still alive." He rode away, and Clara went back to work. The first snow fell on the 28th of October. It was a light snow, barely an inch, more warning than threat, but it coated the ground white and reminded Clara of everything she had not yet done. The roof was finished now, but not sealed. Cold air found its way through gaps in the tar paper. The walls were chinked with mud and straw, but the chinking was already cracking as it dried. The stove, purchased second-hand from Marta Iverson for $6 she could not afford, sat in the center of the cabin, its pipe running up through the roof, but the heating coil was not yet installed. The water system was the worst worry. The pipe ran from the tank to the barrel, and water flowed, but the flow was slow and erratic. Sometimes the drip came steady and strong. Sometimes it stopped for hours, and Clara had to climb up to the tank and clear ice from the valve. Nels had predicted this. "The valve is exposed," he said, examining the mechanism. "The cold reaches it before the heat can. You need to wrap it. Felt if you can find it. Wool if you cannot. Anything that holds warmth." Clara did not have felt. She did not have wool to spare. What little she had was keeping Elias warm at night. But Marta Iverson did. She walked to Marta's claim the next morning, Elias beside her, the 3 miles feeling longer than they ever had before. Marta listened to the problem without interrupting. When Clara finished, Marta went into her sod house and came back with a bundle of wool scraps, offcuts from blankets, worn-out socks, pieces too small to be useful for anything else. "Scraps," she said. "Take them." "I can pay." "No." Marta pressed the bundle into Clara's hands. "You paid when you showed me your plans. I thought you were mad, but I watched you work. Now I think maybe you're not mad. Maybe you're just—" She searched for the word. "Different. And different is not always wrong." Clara took the scraps. She wrapped the valve that afternoon, layering the wool around the exposed metal until it looked like a cocoon. The drip became steady. November came in cold and stayed cold. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees below zero on the 3rd. Clara kept the stove burning day and night, feeding it with fuel she had scrounged from the abandoned rail siding, old ties too rotted to be useful, scrap boards from demolished sheds. anything that would burn. The heating coil was finally installed. Nels had helped her forge it from the salvaged pipe, bending the metal over a fire until it formed a loop that fit inside the stove's firebox. Water passed through the coil on its way to the barrel, and the fire heated it. Not hot, never hot, but warm enough that the barrel did not freeze. The cabin was habitable. It was also miserable. The wind found every gap in the walls. The floor was packed dirt that turned to mud when snow melted off their boots. The single window, a piece of salvaged glass Nels had found at the abandoned claim, was so warped that it distorted everything outside into shapes that barely resembled reality. But the tower side was different. The west wall, the wall that was not really a wall at all, just the gap between the cabin and the tower posts, was warmer than the others. The massive timbers blocked the wind. The tank overhead cut the worst of the cold from above. Clara hung blankets in the gap, creating an insulated buffer, and the temperature on that side of the cabin rose 10 degrees. Elias slept on the tower side. Clara made sure of it. On the 15th of November, Nels fell. He was on the tower platform, adjusting the overflow channel Clara had installed to direct excess water away from the cabin's foundation. The platform was icy. His foot slipped. He caught himself on the railing, but the twist did something to his back. Clara heard him cry out and looked up to see him hanging from the rail, his legs dangling, his face white with pain. "Do not move," she shouted. She was already running for the ladder, the new ladder they had built together, sturdy enough to hold weight. She climbed faster than she had ever climbed anything, her heart pounding in her throat. Nels was still hanging when she reached the platform. She grabbed his arms and pulled. He screamed, but he came over the rail, collapsing onto the platform in a heap. "My back," he gasped. Something is wrong." Clara helped him down the ladder, one rung at a time, supporting his weight as best she could. By the time they reached the ground, she was shaking with exhaustion, and he was barely conscious. She got him inside the cabin, onto the bed, covered him with every blanket she had. The next 3 days were a blur of fear and fever. Nels drifted in and out of consciousness. Clara fed him broth, changed his sweat-soaked clothes, kept the fire burning. Elias was silent and wide-eyed, watching from the corner. On the 4th day, Nels woke up clear. "I cannot stay," he said. His voice was weak but steady. "My back, I cannot climb anymore. I cannot help you." "You can stay here. You can rest." "No." He tried to sit up and failed. "I have a sister in Sioux Falls. She has been asking me to come for years. I should have gone after the station closed." He looked at Clara, and his eyes were sad. "You do not need me anymore, Mrs. Moen. You know everything I know. The rest is just work. You need nothing." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak, but his gaze was fierce. "You are stronger than you think, stronger than your husband was, God rest him, stronger than most men I have known. You will survive this winter, and then you will survive the next one, and the one after that, because that is what you do. You survive." Marta Iverson came to take him the next morning. She had a wagon, and her sons loaded Nels into the back with care. Clara stood by the wagon, unable to speak. Elias held her hand. "Thank you," she finally managed. Nels smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile. "Thank me by living," he said. "That is all I ask." The wagon rolled away. Clara watched until it disappeared over the horizon. Then she went back inside and started counting her fuel supply. December was survivable. The temperature dropped to 20 below on Christmas Day. Clara and Elias ate salt pork and dried apples and pretended it was a feast. The water system held. The heating coil kept the barrel from freezing. The tower side of the cabin stayed 10 degrees warmer than the rest, but the fuel was running out. Clara had enough for maybe 3 more weeks. After that, she would have to burn furniture. After that, she would have to burn the walls. She had heard stories of settlers who did exactly that, dismantling their own cabins from the inside out, feeding the wood to the fire to stay alive, until finally there was nothing left, and the cold came in and took them. She would not let that happen. On the 29th of December, she walked to the abandoned rail siding and scavenged everything that was left: old ties, rotten boards, the door of a collapsed shed. She loaded it onto the mule and dragged it back to the cabin, making 3 trips in a single day. It was enough to last until February. Maybe. And then January came. The morning of January 12th, 1888, dawned warm. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the warped glass window. The air inside the cabin was almost comfortable. Outside, she could hear water dripping from the tank above, ice melting in the unexpected thaw. She opened the door and stood on the threshold, breathing deep. The temperature must have been above freezing. 35, maybe 40 degrees. The snow on the ground was softening into slush. Elias came to stand beside her. "Is spring coming?" he asked. "No." Clara looked at the sky. The sun was bright, the clouds thin and high. "Spring is months away. This is just—" She did not know what to call it: a reprieve, a trick, a false promise. "Can I play outside?" Clara hesitated. Elias had been inside for weeks. The walls of the cabin were pressing in on both of them. A few hours in the sun might do him good. "Stay close," she said. "Do not go past the tower." He ran out into the yard, kicking at the slush, laughing at the sound it made. Clara watched him for a moment, then turned back to her work. There was always work. The change came at noon. Clara was on the tower platform, clearing ice from the overflow channel, when she saw it. A wall of cloud on the horizon, black and solid, moving faster than anything she had ever seen. She did not understand at first. Clouds did not move that fast. Storms did not come that quickly. Then she felt the wind. It hit the tower like a fist. The platform shuddered. Clara grabbed the railing and held on as the temperature dropped, 10 degrees in a minute, 20 degrees in 2. The warmth of the morning vanished as if it had never existed. Below, she heard Elias screaming. She scrambled down the ladder, her hands numb already, her lungs burning with cold that had come from nowhere. The sky was dark now, the sun swallowed by the wall of cloud. Snow began to fall, not gently but horizontally, driven by wind that sounded like a train. "Elias?" She could not see him. The snow was too thick, the wind too loud. "Elias!" A shape emerged from the white, small, stumbling. She ran to him and scooped him up, feeling how cold he already was, how hard he was shaking. She carried him inside and slammed the door. The cabin had never felt so small. Clara wrapped Elias in every blanket they had. She fed the stove until it roared. She checked the water barrel, still liquid, thank God, still warm from the heating coil. But the wind was finding ways in. Every gap in the walls, every crack in the chinking, every place where the tar paper had come loose on the roof, the wind found it. The temperature inside the cabin dropped even as the stove burned. Clara stuffed rags into the gaps. She hung blankets over the walls. She pulled Elias's bed closer to the stove, then closer still, until it was almost touching the metal. Outside, the world had disappeared. The window showed nothing but white. The sound of the wind was constant, a howl that rose and fell but never stopped. Night came early, or maybe it had been coming for hours. Clara could not tell. Time had collapsed into a single question. Would the cabin hold? At some point, the drip from the water barrel stopped. Clara had been dozing, Elias pressed against her side, when she noticed the silence. The drip had been constant for weeks, the heartbeat of the house. Now it was gone. She got up and checked the pipe. Ice had formed at the junction where the heating coil met the main line. The water was not flowing. If the water stopped flowing, the coil would freeze. If the coil froze, the pipe would crack. If the pipe cracked, they would have no water. She had to clear the ice. She had to restart the flow. But the junction was outside, on the tower side of the wall, in the gap between the cabin and the posts. Clara looked at the door. The blanket she had hung over it was rippling in the wind that forced its way through the frame. She could hear the storm beyond it, a sound like the world ending. If she opened that door, the cold would flood in. Whatever warmth they had built would vanish in seconds. Elias would be exposed, but if she did not open the door, the pipe would freeze and crack, and they would lose the water system entirely. Clara pulled on her coat, her gloves, her scarf wrapped around her face until only her eyes were visible. "Stay here," she told Elias. "Keep the blankets on. Do not move." "Mama, do not move." She opened the door. The cold hit her like a wall. She had thought she understood cold. She had spent months preparing for it, building against it, fighting it. But this was different. This was cold as a physical force, cold as a weapon, cold as death reaching out with frozen fingers and grabbing hold. The gap between the cabin and the tower was only 3 feet wide, but the wind turned it into a canyon. Snow blasted through horizontally, piling against the posts, burying the pipe run she had so carefully built. Clara dropped to her knees and started digging. The snow was not soft. It had been compressed by the wind into something closer to ice, and her gloves scraped against it uselessly. She pulled the gloves off and dug with her bare hands, feeling her fingers go numb almost instantly. There, the junction. She could see the ice built up around it, a crust of frozen water where the coil met the main line. She had brought a pot of hot water from inside. She poured it over the ice, and the crust cracked. She poured again, and the crust fell away. She heard the gurgle of water starting to flow, but her hands would not work anymore. She looked down at them. They were white, not pale, white, the color of snow. She could not feel them. Clara stumbled back toward the door. Her legs did not want to move. The wind pushed against her like it wanted to keep her outside, wanted to pin her against the tower post and hold her there until she froze. She found the door handle, pulled it, fell inside. The warmth hit her like a blow. Her hands screamed as blood rushed back into them, and she heard herself crying out, though she could not control the sound. Elias was beside her, pulling at her coat, saying something she could not understand through the pain. She let him drag her toward the stove, let him wrap her hands in blankets, let him bring warm water from the barrel and pour it over her fingers. The water system was working. She could hear the drip again, steady, constant. She had bought them time. The night went on forever. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting to recover from the exposure. Elias stayed beside her, feeding the stove, watching the door as if he expected the storm to come through it. At some point, she did not know when, they heard pounding on the wall, not the wind, something different, something intentional. Clara struggled to her feet. Elias grabbed her arm. "Do not open it," he said. "Mama, do not." The pounding came again, and then a voice, muffled by the storm but recognizable. "Mrs. Moen, are you alive in there?" Amos Reddick. Clara stumbled to the door and pulled it open. Reddick fell inside, covered in ice, his face blue beneath a coating of frost. Behind him, visible only as a shadow in the white, she saw a horse standing with its head down. "Could not," Reddick gasped. "Could not make it back. Road is gone. Everything is." He collapsed onto the floor. Clara dragged him toward the stove. Elias brought blankets. They stripped off Reddick's frozen coat, his ice-caked boots, his gloves that had turned stiff as wood. "Your hands," Clara said. His hands were the same color hers had been. White. Dead white. She brought warm water. She poured it over his fingers, the way Elias had done for her. Reddick screamed, and she held him down while the blood fought its way back into his flesh. "Your tower," he gasped when the worst had passed. "Your tower saved me. I saw it through the white. Only thing standing on the whole prairie. Followed it here." Clara said nothing. She was too tired to speak. Outside, the wind howled on. The storm lasted 18 hours. By morning, the temperature had dropped to 42 degrees below zero. The snow had piled in drifts 20 feet high against the east side of buildings throughout the county. Later, Clara would learn that over 200 people had died across the plains, many of them children caught outside when the storm struck, unable to find their way home through the white. But inside the cabin, the stove burned, the water dripped, the tower held. On the morning of the 13th, the wind finally stopped. Clara opened the door onto a world transformed. The snow had buried everything. The mule shed was invisible beneath a drift. The path to Marta Iverson's claim had ceased to exist, but the tower stood exactly as it had always stood, its posts anchoring it against the worst the plains could offer. And the cabin, her three-walled cabin built against the posts, her tower house, her widow's contraption, stood with it. Reddick came to stand beside her. His hands were bandaged with strips torn from her last good petticoat. 2 of his fingers were black. He would lose them. "I told you this would fail," he said. His voice was quiet. "I told you the tank would freeze and your wall would become a chimney. I told you your boy would die." "Yes," Clara said. "You did." "I was wrong." He looked at the tower, at the tank that had held through the worst night in a decade, at the pipe that still dripped water into the barrel inside. "I have seen a lot of people die on this prairie. Most of them were doing something that made sense at the time." He turned to her. "You did something that made no sense at all, and you are alive." Clara did not know what to say, so she said nothing. Elias came to stand between them, and the 3 of them watched the sun rise over the white. The aftermath of the storm took 3 days to reveal itself. Clara spent the first day digging out, freeing the mule shed, clearing the path to the tower base, checking every joint and seam for damage. The second day she spent helping Reddick recover enough to ride. The third day she walked to Marta Iverson's claim and found it standing, the sod walls buried but intact. Marta and her boys alive. It was Marta who told her about the dead. "The Lindquist children," Marta said. They were standing in the yard, the snow still knee-deep despite 3 days of sun. All 4 of them. They were walking home from the schoolhouse when the storm hit. The teacher kept most of the children inside, but the Lindquists lived only half a mile away. Their mother thought they would make it. Clara said nothing. Half a mile was nothing. Half a mile was a walk she made twice a day. They found them the next morning, Marta continued, huddled together in a drift. The oldest had taken off her coat and wrapped it around the youngest. They froze anyway. The weight of it settled into Clara's chest. 4 children, 4 small bodies in the snow. "The Hendricksons lost their grandfather," Marta said. "He went out to check on the livestock when the wind started. They found him 10 feet from the barn door. He could not see it through the white." Clara thought about her own walk through the gap, the 3 feet between her cabin and the tower posts. She had almost not made it back. If she had been 10 feet away instead of 3. How many? She asked. In the county? 11 dead, that we know of. More missing. Across the territory. Marta shook her head. They are saying hundreds. Hundreds. Hundreds of people who had woken to a warm morning and been dead by nightfall. Your tower house, Marta said. Amos Reddick has been telling everyone who will listen. He says the tower saved his life. He says he saw it through the storm and followed it to your door. He would have died otherwise. Yes. Marta looked at her with something new in her eyes, not the skepticism Clara had seen before, but something closer to respect. And you would have died too, if you had built a normal cabin. No windbreak, no water that did not require going outside to fetch, no landmark tall enough to see through the white. Clara had not thought of it that way. She had built against the tower because she had no other choice. The advantages Marta described, the windbreak, the water system, the visibility, had been accidents of desperation, not strokes of genius. But accidents could still save lives. I want to see it, Marta said. The whole system, how you did it. Why? Because my boys and I spent that night melting snow on the stove to have water to drink. Because the wind came through our walls like they were made of paper. Because if there is a better way to build on this prairie, I want to know it. Clara nodded slowly. Come tomorrow. Bring your boys. I will show you everything. They came at dawn. Marta Iverson and her 2 sons, Eric, 17, and Peter, 15, stood in Clara's yard and looked up at the tower with expressions that mixed skepticism and wonder. You built against this, Eric said. It was not a question. I had no choice. You had choices, Marta corrected. You just saw something the rest of us did not. Clara led them around the cabin, explaining as she went. She showed them the sill line that defined 3 walls instead of 4. She showed them the gap between the cabin and the tower posts, narrow enough to block wind but wide enough for maintenance. She showed them the blankets hung in the gap, creating an insulated buffer that kept the tower side 10 degrees warmer than the rest. She climbed up to the tank and showed them the sealed seams, the tightened hoops, the overflow channel that directed excess water away from the foundation. She showed them the drain valve wrapped in wool, the pipe run that descended along the service gap, the junction where the heating coil connected. Inside the cabin, she showed them the coil itself, the loop of pipe that sat in the firebox, warming every drop of water before it reached the barrel. She showed them the barrel with its slow but steady drip. She showed them the frost box Nels had built around the interior pipe section, packed with straw and felt scraps. The water never stopped? Peter asked. He was crouched by the barrel, watching the drip with fascination. Once, during the storm, ice built up at the junction outside. I had to go out and clear it. In the storm? Yes. Peter looked at his brother. Some silent communication passed between them. We have a well, Eric said, but it is 50 yards from the house. During the storm, we could not reach it. We had nothing to drink but what we could melt. If you had a cistern, Clara said, fed by roof runoff, stored above ground level with a pipe run to the house. We do not have a tower. You do not need a tower. Clara had been thinking about this. Any elevated structure will work, a platform on posts, a tank on legs. The tower was convenient because it already existed, but the principle is the same. Water up high flows down without pumping. Heat near the pipe keeps the water from freezing. That is all there is to it. Marta was studying the cabin's west wall, the wall that was not a wall at all. The windbreak, she said. That is the part I cannot replicate. I have no tower. I have no posts. You have a sod house. Sod does not need a windbreak. It is its own insulation. Your problem is different. My problem is water. Yes, Clara thought for a moment. Your roof is flat. Sod roofs do not shed water the way a pitched roof does. But you could build a pitched addition, a lean-to on the east side, angled to catch rain and funnel it to a barrel. The barrel could be elevated inside the lean-to, above the level of your main house. A pipe run through the wall past your stove. Would that work? I do not know. I have never tried it. Clara looked at Marta, at her sons, at the expressions on their faces. But I think the principle is sound, and I think trying is better than melting snow on the stove while the storm howls outside. Marta nodded slowly. Will you help us design it? Yes. Word spread. By the end of January, Clara had received visits from 7 families. They came with questions about windbreaks and water systems, about pipe runs and heating coils, about how a widow with no building experience had survived a storm that killed hundreds. She answered every question. She drew diagrams in the dirt. She climbed up to the tank platform and showed them the seams she had packed, the hoops she had tightened. She let them examine the heating coil, the frost box, the interior barrel with its steady drip. Some of them looked at her the way Amos Reddick had once looked at her, with skepticism, with the certainty that what she had built was a fluke, an accident, something that could not be replicated. Others looked at her differently. They looked at her the way Marta had, with hunger, with the desperate need to understand. Clara helped both kinds. She could not make people believe in what she had built, but she could show them how it worked. The rest was up to them. Silas Brundage came on the 3rd of February. He did not come alone. He brought with him a man Clara did not recognize, tall, well-dressed, with the look of someone who had never done manual labor in his life. Mrs. Moen, Brundage said. His voice was different than it had been before the storm, less sneering, more careful. This is Mr. Aldrich. He represents investors from Sioux Falls. They are interested in your innovation. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. She had been sorting the last of her dried beans, rationing them to last until spring. The winter was more than half over, but the hardest months were still ahead. What kind of interest? She asked. Aldrich stepped forward. His smile was polished, professional. Mrs. Moen, what you have built here is remarkable. An integrated system that provides shelter, water, and heat, all from a single abandoned structure. With proper investment, this concept could be developed and sold to settlers throughout the territory. Sold? Yes. Imagine a company that acquires abandoned rail infrastructure, modifies it according to your design, and sells improved homesteads to incoming settlers. The water system alone would be worth... No. The word came out flat and final. Aldrich's smile flickered. Mrs. Moen, perhaps you do not understand the opportunity. I understand it perfectly. Clara looked at Brundage, who was standing slightly behind Aldrich, with an expression she could not read. You want to take what I built to survive and turn it into something you can profit from. You want to sell water and shelter to people who have nothing, the way you sell nails at 12 cents a pound when they cost you 8. Now, Mrs. Moen, Brundage began, you gave me short measure on nails. You delayed my pipe order. You offered me credit at terms that would have stripped me of everything I own. Clara's voice did not rise, but something in it made both men take a step back. You told me I was going to die, and when I did not die, you came here to see if you could profit from my survival. This is a business opportunity, Aldrich said. His smile was gone now. Nothing more. Then find your opportunity somewhere else. What I know, I will share freely with anyone who asks. I will not sell it, and I will not let you sell it either. Brundage's face had gone red. You cannot stop us from... From what? Building your own towers? Go ahead, build them, but you will have to learn how first, and I will not teach you. Clara opened the cabin door. Get off my claim. They left. Clara watched them ride away, Brundage's back stiff with anger, Aldrich turning once to look back at the tower with calculating eyes. She knew she had not seen the last of them. That night, Clara sat by the stove and thought about Nels. He would have laughed at Brundage's offer. He would have said something dry and cutting, something that made the absurdity of it clear. He would have told Clara she was right to refuse. But Nels was in Sioux Falls with his sister. Nels might never come back. Clara looked at her hands. The frostbite from the storm had healed, but the skin was still tender, still marked with faint white patches where the cold had gone deepest. She could work, but she felt the damage every time she gripped a tool. She thought about what Nels had taught her, how to sound timber, how to pack seams, how to think about water as a living thing that wanted to flow, wanted to find the lowest point, wanted to freeze unless you kept it moving. He had given her knowledge, and then he had left her alone to use it. That was the real gift. Not the help, the leaving. Nels had trusted her to survive without him, and she had. Outside, the wind had picked up. It moaned through the tower posts, a sound Clara had grown to recognize as the voice of the plains themselves. Some nights it sounded like mourning. Tonight it sounded almost like music. Elias was asleep on the tower side of the cabin, wrapped in blankets, his breathing slow and steady. He had grown during the winter, not taller, but harder somehow, more serious. He no longer asked if they were going to freeze. He helped with the water barrel, with the fuel supply, with the endless small tasks that kept them alive. He was learning, the way Clara had learned, the way Nels had once learned from someone whose name she would never know. That was how knowledge survived, not through companies and investors, through hands and eyes and the willingness to watch carefully and do the work. Clara added another piece of wood to the fire and watched the flames leap up. The secondary crisis came in the third week of February. Clara was returning from Marta's claim. She had been helping the Iverson boys design their water collection system when she saw the smoke. It was coming from the northeast, from the direction of a claim she had never visited. The smoke was thick and black, rising in a column that bent sideways in the wind. She ran. By the time she reached the claim, the cabin was fully engulfed. A woman was standing in the yard holding a child, screaming something Clara could not understand. Two more children huddled behind her, their faces blank with shock. There was nothing to be done about the cabin. The fire had consumed it entirely, the flames roaring up through the roof and sending sparks spinning into the sky. But the woman was pointing at something. At the barn, Clara realized. The barn that sat 30 yards from the burning cabin, its walls already beginning to smoke from the heat. "My husband," the woman screamed. "He went to get the animals. He has not come out." Clara did not think. She pulled her scarf over her mouth and nose and ran for the barn. The heat was incredible. She could feel it through her coat, through her gloves, baking her skin even at 20 yards. The barn door was closed. Had the man closed it behind him? Had it swung shut in the wind? She reached the door and pulled. It did not move. She pulled again, harder, and felt something give. The door swung open and smoke poured out. Clara dropped to her knees. The air was clearer near the ground. Nels had told her that once, talking about a mill fire he had survived. She crawled into the barn. The smoke was thick, but she could see shapes. The shapes of animals, a cow, two horses, their eyes rolling with terror, and a shape on the ground, a man lying face down. She crawled to him. He was not moving. She grabbed his arm and pulled, and he was heavier than she expected, heavier than anything she had ever tried to move. But she pulled anyway, dragging him inch by inch toward the door, toward the light, toward the air. The roof groaned. Clara looked up and saw flames licking through the gaps in the boards overhead. The barn was going to collapse. The barn was going to collapse, and she was still inside. She pulled harder. The man's body scraped across the dirt floor. The door was 10 feet away, 8 feet, 5. The roof collapsed behind her. Clara did not see it fall. She only felt the rush of heat, the blast of air that pushed her forward, the roar that swallowed every other sound. She grabbed the man and threw herself through the door, rolling across the frozen ground until she hit something solid. The woman was screaming again. The children were crying. Clara lay on her back and looked up at the sky, coughing smoke from her lungs. The man was beside her. He was breathing. She could see his chest rising and falling. She had gotten him out. The man's name was Henrik Dahl. His wife was Ingrid. Their children were Solveig, Anders, and little Kristen. The fire had started in the chimney, a crack in the pipe, sparks on dry wood, the whole cabin gone in minutes. Henrik had tried to save the animals, but the smoke had overwhelmed him. They had nothing now, no cabin, no supplies, no way to survive the remaining weeks of winter. Clara took them home. Her cabin was not built for 6 people, but she made room. She put the children on the tower side with Elias, wrapped in every blanket she could find. She put Henrik near the stove, where Ingrid could tend to the burns on his hands and face. She herself slept sitting up, her back against the wall, dozing in snatches between trips to the water barrel and the fuel pile. The Dahls stayed for 8 days. In that time, Clara learned their story. They had come from Minnesota the previous spring, full of hope and plans. They had filed on their claim, built their cabin, planted their first crop. The summer had been dry, the harvest poor, but they had held on. They had believed they would make it. And then the fire. "We have nothing left," Ingrid said one night, her voice hollow. The children were asleep. Henrik was dozing, his bandaged hands resting on his chest. No money, no supplies, no way to rebuild. "You have time," Clara said. "Time for what? To watch our children starve?" "Time to build again." Clara looked at the woman, at the exhaustion in her face, the despair in her eyes. "I had nothing when I came here. $34 and a claim I did not know how to work. Everyone told me I would die. Some of them wanted me to die." She paused. "I am still here. You had the tower. I had a ruin, an abandoned structure that everyone said would kill me." Clara leaned forward. "Mrs. Dahl, the tower did not save me. Knowledge saved me. Work saved me. The willingness to try something that made no sense because nothing else made sense either." She reached out and took Ingrid's hand. "You can rebuild. Not the same way. You have no tower. But there are other ways. Better ways than what you had before." "How?" "I will show you. When the weather breaks, I will help you design something that will not burn so easily. Something that holds water without hauling. Something that protects against the wind." Clara squeezed Ingrid's hand. "You are not alone. None of us are alone out here, even when we feel like we are." Ingrid was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You do not know us. You owe us nothing." Clara thought about Nels Brecka, about his daughter who had died in Nebraska, about the debt he had tried to repay by teaching a stranger how to survive. "Someone helped me once," she said. "Now I'm helping you. That is how it works." The Dahls left on the 1st of March. The temperature had risen above freezing for the first time since November, and the roads were passable again. Clara walked with them to the edge of her claim and pointed northeast. There is an abandoned sod house 4 miles that direction. The roof is gone, but the walls are sound. You can shelter there while you rebuild. How do you know about it? Nels told me. He knew every abandoned structure within 20 miles. Clara smiled at the memory. He said they were resources, not ruins. He said the frontier was full of things people had given up on that could still be useful. Henrik gripped her hand. His bandages were off now, the skin beneath scarred but healed. We will repay you, somehow. Pass it on. That is all I ask. When you see someone who needs help, help them. That is how you repay me. The dolls walked away, their children trailing behind them. Clara watched until they disappeared over the rise. Then she went back to the cabin and started planning for spring. The thaw came slowly, then all at once. By mid-March, the snow had melted into rivers of muddy water that carved channels across the prairie. The tower's drain valve ran constantly, the tank filling with snowmelt that poured off the cabin roof. Clara's water barrel overflowed for the first time, and she had to open the overflow channel and let the excess drain away. It was a good problem to have. The cabin had survived its first winter. More than survived, it had proven itself. The tower side wall had not rotted. The tank had not split. The pipe run had frozen only once, and Clara had learned how to prevent it from happening again. She was already planning improvements. A second barrel for drinking water only, with a filter box to catch sediment. A removable section of pipe that could be taken inside during the coldest nights. An expanded frost box with better insulation. A drying rack near the stove, warmed by the heating coil, where clothes and herbs could be dried without using precious fuel. And beyond the improvements, expansion. She could see it now, the way Nels had taught her to see. Not just survival, but growth. A root cellar dug beneath the cabin. A chicken coop built against the tower's north side. A smokehouse. A garden plot. A proper barn with a pipe run of its own. The claim was becoming a homestead, and the homestead was becoming a home. Marta Iverson came to visit on the 20th of March, bringing news. The Hendricksons are building a cistern, she said. Eric helped them design it. They are using the principle you showed us, elevated storage, gravity feed, heating coil. Good. The Bergstroms are doing something similar, and the Thompsons, and the new family that took the claim south of town. The Nielsen's, I think. Marta shook her head. Mrs. Moen, half the county is talking about water systems now. They call it the tower method, even when there is no tower involved. Clara laughed, a real laugh, the first in months. The tower method. You should be proud. I am relieved. Pride is for people who have finished. Clara looked at the cabin, at the tower rising above it. I am not finished. I am not sure I ever will be. None of us are. Marta smiled. That is what life on the prairie means. You build, and then you build more, and then you fix what you built before. It never stops. Do you mind? Mind? Marta considered the question. No, I do not mind. It is hard, but it is mine. The work and the worry and the never-ending building, all of it is mine. That matters more than I expected it would. Clara nodded. She understood. Amos Reddick returned on the 1st of April. His hands were healed now, but 2 fingers on his left hand were gone, lost to the frostbite he had suffered during the storm. He wore a glove over the damaged hand, but Clara could see the emptiness where the fingers had been. Mrs. Moen, he said. He did not dismount. I came to say something. Say it. I told you that if you built against the tower, your boy would freeze with you before February. He paused. I was wrong. About all of it. Clara had heard his admission before, in the immediate aftermath of the storm. But this was different. This was deliberate. This was Amos Reddick, who had survived 30 winters and buried his own children to the cold, standing in her yard and acknowledging that a widow with no building experience had known something he had not. "I know you were wrong," Clara said. "So does everyone else. That is why I am here." Reddick pulled off his hat and held it against his chest. "I want to learn. The tower method, they are calling it. I want to know how it works." "You?" "I have a nephew coming from Minnesota. He has a wife and 3 children. He has filed on a claim 10 miles north, and he has no idea what he's facing." Reddick's voice was rough. "I will not watch another family die because I was too proud to learn something new." Clara looked at the man who had predicted her death, at his missing fingers, at the humility in his face. "Bring him here when he arrives," she said. "I will teach him everything I know." Spring unfolded around them. Clara planted a garden on the east side of the cabin where the morning sun hit first. She traded labor with Marta for seed potatoes, carrots, turnips, the hardy vegetables that could survive the short growing season. She built a fence from salvaged rail ties to keep the rabbits out. Elias helped. He was 7 now, old enough for real work. He dug furrows, planted seeds, hauled water from the barrel to the garden rows. He did not complain. He did not question. He worked the way Clara worked, steadily, patiently, with the understanding that work was what kept them alive. The tower method spread. By May, a dozen families in the county had built some version of Clara's system: elevated water storage, gravity feed, heating coils for winter. Not all of them worked perfectly. Some had problems Clara had not anticipated: drainage issues, filter failures, structural weaknesses. She visited each one and helped them troubleshoot, sharing what she knew, learning from their mistakes. She began to see patterns, the same problems appearing in different places, the same solutions that worked, the same shortcuts that failed. She started keeping notes, rough diagrams, measurements, lists of what to do and what not to do. It was not a book. It was not even close to a book. But it was knowledge, captured and organized, ready to be shared. Silas Brundage returned in June. He came alone this time, without investors or partners. He rode into Clara's yard on a hot afternoon while she was repairing a section of pipe that had cracked during the spring thaw. "Mrs. Moen," he said. Clara did not look up from her work. "Mr. Brundage." "I wanted to." He stopped, started again. "My store flooded last month. The creek rose higher than anyone expected. We lost half our inventory." Clara kept working. The pipe section was almost fitted. Another minute and she could test it. "I am rebuilding," Brundage continued. "But I am thinking about doing it differently. About water management, about drainage, about—" He paused. "About the things you know. You want my help. I am asking for it." "Yes." Clara set down her tools and looked at him. The man who had cheated her on nails, who had delayed her pipe order, who had offered her predatory credit and predicted her death, who had tried to profit from her survival and been turned away. "Why should I help you?" she asked. "You should not." Brundage's voice was flat. "I gave you every reason to hate me. I would understand if you refused." He took a breath. "But my store serves everyone in this county. If it fails, people will have to travel 30 miles for supplies. They will go without medicine, without hardware, without the things they need to survive, and some of them will die because of it." Clara thought about the Lindquist children, frozen in a drift half a mile from home, about the dolls, huddled in her cabin with nothing left but the clothes on their backs, about the dozens of families who had lost everything to the storm, the fire, the endless grinding difficulty of life on the prairie. She thought about Nels, who had helped her because he could not save his own daughter. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I will look at your site and tell you what I think." Brundage nodded once. "Thank you." He rode away, and Clara went back to her pipe. The store took 3 months to rebuild. Clara did not do the work herself. She had her own claim to manage, her own improvements to complete, but she designed the drainage system. She showed Brundage's hired men how to elevate the foundation, how to channel water away from the walls, how to create storage that would stay dry even in a flood. She did not charge him. She did not forgive him either. But she helped, because helping was what she did now, because the store served the whole county and the county needed it. Brundage never apologized. He never admitted that he had cheated her or tried to profit from her desperation. But something changed between them. He stopped sneering. He started filling her orders correctly. He started recommending her to new settlers who needed help with their claims. It was not friendship. It was not even respect exactly. It was something more practical, the recognition that they needed each other, and that need could be more powerful than grudges. Summer faded into autumn. Autumn sharpened into the first frost of the new year. Clara stood on the tower platform on a morning in late October and looked out at the prairie. The grass had turned gold, then brown, then begun to flatten under the first light snows. The sky was gray and heavy, promising the winter that was coming, but this year she was ready. The fuel pile was twice as large as last year. The water system had been improved in a dozen ways. The cabin walls were better chinked, the roof better sealed, the heating coil more efficient. She had dried vegetables and salted meat and enough preserved food to last until spring, and she was not alone. Marta Iverson came by once a week now, bringing news and trading labor. Amos Reddick's nephew had built a successful homestead using the tower method, and he sent word that 3 more families in his area wanted to learn. The Dahls had rebuilt on their old claim using Clara's designs, and had survived the summer without incident. The tower method was spreading, not as a business, not as a company, but as knowledge passed from hand to hand, from neighbor to neighbor, from one desperate settler to another. That was enough. That was more than enough. Clara climbed down from the platform and went inside to check on Elias. He was at the table, practicing his letters on a slate Marta had lent them. He looked up when she entered, his face serious. "Mama," he said, "winter's coming." "Yes." "Are we going to be all right?" Clara thought about the tower, about the water system and the heating coil and the windbreak wall, about the fuel pile and the food stores and the neighbors who would help if things went wrong. She thought about Nels Brecka, who had taught her to listen to wood, about Amos Reddick, who had admitted he was wrong, about Silas Brundage, who had finally stopped fighting her. She thought about all the families who would survive this winter because of what she had built and what she had shared. "Yes," she said, "we are going to be all right." Outside, the wind began to rise. The second winter was easier than the first, not easy. Nothing on the Dakota prairie was ever easy, but easier. Clara knew the rhythms now. She knew when to check the valve for ice, when to add fuel to the frost box, when to wrap the exposed sections of pipe with extra insulation. She knew the sounds the tower made in different kinds of wind, the creaks and groans that meant nothing, and the sharper noises that meant something needed attention. Elias knew too. He was 7.5 now, and he had stopped being a child who needed protection and started becoming a partner who shared the work. He checked the water barrel every morning without being asked. He kept the fuel pile stacked. He knew how to sound a timber with a mallet and listen for rot. Clara watched him work and saw echoes of herself at that age, watching her father repair barrels, learning without knowing she was learning. The knowledge was passing forward. That was how it survived. The visitor arrived in early December. Clara was on the tower platform, clearing snow from the overflow channel, when she saw the wagon approaching from the southeast. It was a heavy wagon, pulled by 2 draft horses loaded with lumber and tools. She climbed down and waited. The driver was a man she did not recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they had been shaped by a lifetime of work. He was perhaps 40 years old, with gray starting at his temples and lines around his eyes that deepened when he squinted against the winter sun. "Mrs. Moen?" he asked. "Yes." "My name is Thomas Lund. I'm a carpenter. I worked the rail camps for 15 years before the company cut crews." He gestured at his wagon. "I have been traveling since September, looking for work. I heard about what you built here." Clara studied him. His clothes were worn but clean. His equipment was well maintained. His horses looked healthy. "What did you hear?" she asked. "That a widow built a homestead against an abandoned water tower. That she survived the worst blizzard in a decade. That she has been teaching people a new way to build." Thomas Lund met her eyes. "I heard that she knows things most builders do not." "And you want to learn?" "I want to work." He paused. "I've been building for 20 years. I know joinery and framing and roof work. But what you have done here, the water system, the windbreak, the heating coil, that is something different. Something I have never seen." He looked up at the tower, at the tank silhouetted against the gray sky. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for an exchange. I have skills you need. You have knowledge I need. Maybe we can help each other." Clara thought about the improvements she had been planning. The root cellar she could not dig alone. The barn she could not frame without help. The dozen projects that required a second pair of hands, hands that knew what they were doing. "Where are you staying?" she asked. "I have a tent in the wagon. I can camp anywhere." "There is a sod house 4 miles northeast. The roof is gone, but the walls are sound. You can shelter there while we figure out the rest." Thomas Lund nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Moen." "Do not thank me yet. You have not seen how hard the work is." He came back the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Clara put him to work immediately. The root cellar came first, a pit dug beneath the cabin floor, deep enough to stay cool in summer and above freezing in winter. Thomas knew how to shore the walls, how to frame the entrance, how to build a ladder that would last. He worked steadily, without complaint, asking questions when he needed to and staying silent when he did not. Clara watched him the way she had once watched Nels looking for signs of incompetence, waiting for the moment when the work would prove too hard or too strange. That moment never came. "You are good at this," she said one afternoon, watching him notch a support beam with precise economical strokes. "I have been doing it a long time." "But you are learning too. I can see it." Thomas set down his tools and looked at her. "Mrs. Moen, I have built 100 buildings in my life. Cabins, barns, bridges, stations, but I have never built anything like this." He gestured at the tower, at the cabin, at the pipe run that connected them. "This is not just construction. This is—" He searched for the word. "Thinking. Seeing how things connect. Water and heat and shelter, all working together. I did not know that was possible. Nels Brecke taught me, a cooper and pump hand. He saw what I was trying to do, and he helped me understand why it might work." "Is he still alive?" "I do not know. He went to Sioux Falls to stay with his sister. I have not heard from him since." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "My wife died 3 years ago. Cholera on the train west. I kept working because I did not know what else to do. But the work felt empty after that. Building things that did not matter, for people who did not care." He picked up his tools again. "This feels different. This feels like building something that matters." Clara did not know what to say, so she said nothing and they went back to work. The root cellar was finished by Christmas. The barn followed in January, a proper structure this time, with a pipe run of its own and a windbreak wall facing west. Thomas designed the framing. Clara designed the water system. They argued about measurements, about materials, about the best way to anchor posts in frozen ground. The arguments were productive, sharpening their ideas against each other until the rough edges wore smooth. Elias watched them work. He asked questions, endless questions, and Thomas answered them with patience that surprised Clara. He showed the boy how to use a level, how to read a plumb line, how to cut a joint that would hold under stress. He did not talk down to Elias. He treated him like a small apprentice, which was exactly what he was. Clara found herself looking forward to the mornings when Thomas's wagon would appear on the horizon. She told herself it was because she needed the help. She told herself it was practical, nothing more. She was lying, and she knew it. The confrontation with Brundage came in February. Clara was in town buying supplies when she heard the shouting. It was coming from outside the store, Brundage's store, newly rebuilt with the drainage system Clara had designed. She walked toward the sound and found a crowd gathered around two men. One was Brundage, the other was Thomas Lund. "Take in work that belongs to local men," Brundage was saying. His face was red, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. "Coming in here with your rail camp skills, cozying up to widows, stealing jobs." "I have not stolen anything," Thomas said. His voice was calm, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "I have worked for my meals. I have traded labor for shelter. I have not taken a single job that anyone else wanted." "You have taken plenty." Brundage stepped closer. "You think we do not see what you are doing? Moving in on the Moen claim, making yourself useful, waiting for the widow to—" "Silas." Clara's voice cut through the crowd. People turned to look at her. Brundage's mouth snapped shut. She walked forward until she was standing between the two men. "What exactly are you accusing Mr. Lund of doing?" she asked. Brundage recovered quickly. "I am saying that this man has no business on your claim. No business in this county. He is a drifter, He is a carpenter who has helped me build a root cellar, a barn, and a chicken coop in the past 2 months. He has worked harder than any man I have ever seen. He has asked for nothing but fair exchange." Clara's voice did not rise, but something in it made Brundage take a step back. "What have you done in that time, Silas? Besides sell short measure and spread gossip?" the crowd murmured. Someone laughed. Brundage's face went from red to pale. "Mrs. Moen, I was only trying to protect—" "Protect what? Your pride? Your position?" Clara shook her head. "I remember what you said when I first came to this county. You told me I was going to freeze to death playing house against a rotten tower. You told me my boy would die with me. You offered me credit at terms that would have stripped me of everything I owned." She stepped closer. "I survived anyway, and then I helped you rebuild your store when it flooded. I designed your drainage system. I saved your inventory from the next flood that would have wiped you out." Brundage said nothing. "I did not have to help you," Clara continued. "I did not have to share what I know with anyone, but I did it anyway because that is how a community survives, by helping each other, by sharing knowledge instead of hoarding it." She gestured at Thomas. "This man understands that. You do not." The crowd was silent now. Everyone was watching. Brundage looked at the faces around him, at the neighbors who had seen his confrontation, who had heard Clara's words, who were waiting to see what he would do. He could fight. He could double down. He could try to turn the crowd against her. Instead, he did something Clara had never seen him do before. He lowered his head. "I apologize," he said. His voice was quiet, barely audible. "To both of you. Clara nodded once. She took Thomas's arm and led him away from the crowd, away from Brundage, away from the store. They did not speak until they were clear of town. "You did not have to do that," Thomas said. "Yes, I did." Clara looked at him, at the man who had become something more than a worker, more than a partner, more than she had expected. "I protect what is mine." Thomas stopped walking. He turned to face her. "Am I yours?" he asked. The question hung in the cold air between them. "I do not know," Clara said. "Are you?" He kissed her. It was not the kiss of a young man, full of urgency and fire. It was the kiss of someone who had lost enough to know what loss felt like, and who was choosing to risk it anyway. Clara kissed him back. They married in April. It was a small ceremony, just Marta Iverson and her boys, Amos Reddick and his nephew, the Dahl family, a few other neighbors. They stood in front of the cabin Clara had built, beneath the tower that had saved her life, and spoke vows that were simple and practical and true. Thomas moved his tools into the barn. His wagon became their wagon. His horses joined the mule and the milk cow in the pasture that Clara had fenced the summer before. They did not talk about love. They talked about work, about the improvements they would make in the coming months, about the claims that needed help, about the knowledge they would share. Love was underneath all of it, invisible but present, like water flowing through a pipe. Elias started calling Thomas Papa in June. No one told him to. He just did. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The homestead grew, the barn expanded, a smokehouse went up, then a proper chicken coop, then a second cabin for the workers who came to learn and stayed to help. Clara and Thomas took in 2 more children, orphans from a fever that swept through the county in the spring of '91, and raised them alongside Elias. The tower method spread beyond the county, beyond the territory, into Minnesota and Nebraska and the northern reaches of Kansas. People wrote letters asking for advice. Newspapers sent reporters to interview the widow who had built a homestead against a ruin. Clara answered every question, drew every diagram, shared every piece of knowledge she had. She never charged for it. She never tried to profit from it. The knowledge was not hers to sell. It belonged to everyone who needed it. Nels Brecka died in Sioux Falls in the winter of 1892. His sister sent Clara a letter with the news. He had been sick for months, she said. He had talked about Clara often, about the widow who had listened to Wood. He had been proud of what she had built. Clara read the letter 3 times, then folded it and put it away. She did not cry. Nels would not have wanted her to cry. He would have wanted her to keep working. She kept working. Amos Reddick died in the spring of 1894, his heart giving out while he was teaching his grandnephew how to frame a windbreak wall. He was 71 years old. He had spent the last 6 years of his life helping settlers build water systems and elevated storage, passing on knowledge that had once seemed impossible. At his funeral, Clara spoke. "Amos Reddick told me I was going to freeze to death," she said. The crowd was large, 50 people, maybe more, gathered on a hillside overlooking the prairie. "He told me my son would die with me. He was wrong, and he admitted it. That took courage. But what took more courage was what came after. He spent the rest of his life learning and teaching and helping people who reminded him of everything he had once dismissed." She paused, looking at the grave, at the simple wooden marker that would stand over it. We do not honor Amos by praising him. We honor him by doing what he did, by admitting when we are wrong, by learning from people who know things we do not, by helping the next desperate family that arrives with nothing and needs everything. She looked at the crowd. That is how a community survives. That is what Amos taught me. She stepped back. Others spoke. Reddick's family, his friends, people he had helped over the years. But Clara did not hear them. She was thinking about all the people who had shaped her life on the prairie. Nels, who had taught her to listen. Amos, who had taught her that doubt could become belief. Thomas, who had taught her that partnership did not mean weakness. She was 51 years old. She had been on the claim for 17 years. She had survived blizzards and fires and droughts and losses. She had built something that would outlast her. That was enough. Silas Brundage died in 1903. He was 78 years old, and he had spent the last decade of his life running a store that served the whole county fairly, filling orders correctly, extending credit at reasonable terms. He had never become a good man exactly, but he had become a better one. That was something. At his funeral, Clara did not speak, but she attended, and she stood near the grave, and she thought about all the years of conflict and resentment and slow, grudging change. His son took over the store. On the first day of business, under new management, he came to Clara's claim with a delivery she had not ordered. "My father asked me to bring this," he said. He handed her a small box. Inside was a handful of nails, exactly 2 pounds, the amount Brundage had shorted her on that first order more than 15 years before. "He counted them himself," the son said, "before he died. He said you would understand." Clara looked at the nails. They were good quality, better than what she had originally paid for. "I understand," she said. Thomas died in the winter of 1912. It was not dramatic. His heart simply stopped one morning while he was working in the barn, the way Amos Reddick's heart had stopped, the way so many hearts stopped on the prairie. Clara found him slumped against a post, his tools still in his hands. She was 63 years old. They had been married for 24 years. The funeral was large, larger than Reddick's, larger than Brundage's. People came from 3 counties to pay respects to the carpenter who had helped build half the homesteads in the region. Elias spoke, his voice steady, his words simple. The adopted children spoke. Neighbors and friends and strangers spoke. Clara did not speak. She stood by the grave and watched them lower her husband into the ground, and she thought about all the years they had shared, the work, the arguments, the quiet evenings by the stove, planning the next project, the next improvement, the next family that needed help. She had loved him. She had never told him that in so many words, but he had known. The work was the language. The partnership was the proof. After the funeral, after the mourners had gone, Clara walked back to the cabin. The tower rose above it, the same tower that had been there when she arrived with nothing, the same tower that had saved her life in the blizzard of '88. She put her hand on the wall, the west wall, the wall that was not really a wall at all, just the space between her life and the structure that had made it possible. The wood was cold, but solid, still standing after 25 years, still holding. She went inside and started planning the next improvement. Clara Halverson Moen Lund lived until 1927. She was 78 years old when she died, the same age Silas Brundage had been. She died in the cabin she had built, in the bed on the tower side, surrounded by children and grandchildren and neighbors who had learned everything they knew from her. In the end, over 300 families in the region had adopted some version of the tower method. Elevated water storage, gravity feed, heating coils, the principles she had learned from Nels Brecka and refined through decades of trial and error. Some of the installations were simple, a barrel on a platform, a pipe through a wall. Others were complex, multi-tank systems that served entire farmsteads, gravity-fed irrigation for gardens and livestock, heated water for year-round use. The principles spread because Clara shared them freely, teaching anyone who asked, refusing payment, insisting only that knowledge be passed forward rather than hoarded. When reporters asked why she never patented her designs, she said the same thing every time. You cannot own water. You cannot own warmth. You can only share them. Elias inherited the claim. He was 64 when his mother died, a grandfather himself, with children and grandchildren scattered across 3 states. He had spent his entire life on the homestead, first as a boy learning to check the water barrel, then as a man maintaining the systems his mother had built, finally as an elder teaching the next generation. He kept the tower. Other structures came and went, barns burned, cabins expanded, outbuildings rose and fell, but the tower remained. He replaced rotted posts when he had to. He resealed the tank every decade. He kept the water flowing. It is not just a building, he told his grandchildren. It is a promise. My mother made it, and I keep it. Someday you will keep it too. The tower still stands. On January 12th, 1928, 40 years to the day after the children's blizzard, Elias Moen stood on the tower platform and looked out at the prairie. The temperature had dropped 30 degrees overnight, but the sky was clear. No wall of black cloud on the horizon, no wind that sounded like a train, just the cold and the snow and the silence. He thought about what Amos Reddick had said all those years ago when his mother was just a widow with a plan that made no sense. If you put your winter wall against that rot, your boy will freeze with you before February. Elias looked down at the cabin below. Smoke rose from the chimney. Light glowed in the windows. Inside, his daughter was making breakfast. His grandchildren were arguing about something. He could hear their voices, thin and distant, but alive. He put his hand on the railing, the same railing his mother had gripped during the storm, the same railing Nels Breka had nearly fallen from. The wood was rough beneath his palm, weathered by decades of wind and snow and sun. 40 years, 40 winters, and the tower was still standing, and the water was still flowing, and Clara Halverson Moen's boy had not frozen. He climbed down the ladder and went inside for breakfast.